It's been a really long time, so I hope everybody's having a really good summer. There's just been a lot going on my end with regards to different types of clients, extensive research, which is why I wanted to do a video today. I started to write about it earlier in the week, actually towards the end of last week, and have I'm finding that it's going to take a lot to actually say in a short blog to actually keep somebody's attention. So I thought I'd actually say it here, and I might actually add on to it a little bit in the blog. The blog is actually tammydavis8.wordpress.com. That's tammydavis8, all lowercase, .wordpress.com if you'd like to follow me over there, because I've been writing more along the lines of what I've been doing videos on, just to kind of create different content. So anyway, if you'd like to go check it out, head over there. Let me know what you think. Let me know what questions you might have. Again, I just want to preference anything by saying it's very difficult to make very specific suggestions unless I get to know you a little bit more. And so I realize that the way we currently understand nutrition and essential oils and herbs it's very generalized, and that essentially one thing is good for everyone, and it's not. You really need to treat it individually, and so therefore I really work to establish a very personalized assessment in order to give you the best suggestions. So that's really why I don't get into a lot of specifics in either the videos and or the blog, simply because unless I have the full picture of the individual that's asking me questions or the person who's we're talking for, it's not 100%. Well, nothing's 100%, but I think you get what I'm saying. So anyway, what brings me to today is sensory processing disorder, otherwise also known as sensory integration disorder. I've seen people refer to it as SPD, SID, and in fact, the image that I used started to use for the blog had to do with identifying specific diagnoses that are related to sensory processing disorder. We see things such as ADHD, ADD, PTSD, anxiety, depression, autism, schizophrenia. Does any of that surprise you? No, it doesn't me either. But but again, the thing that I like to really emphasize when I'm speaking to anyone, or for that matter, writing, is that even though we have an individual diagnosis, say, such as Parkinson's or schizophrenia or addiction, that no matter what you're dealing with, you're actually dealing with the same thing, in the sense that it's just a neurochemical imbalance. And I've said it before, when one chemical is out, they're all out, which is the reason why I wanted to talk about sensory processing disorder. Because basically it comes down to the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is regulated primarily by two neurotransmitters, acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Also, epinephrine is thrown into the mix. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, the only difference between the two of them is a methyl group. Methyl group is a carbon. So that's the distinguishing difference. Now, they do have different functions in the body, but as far as chemical structures are concerned, there's very little difference between the two of them. And we do know the autonomic nervous system to be, it has an excitatory aspect to it, such as the fight or flight, and it has the inhibitory, which is the calming down when we realize that, hey, there's something really wrong, that we can just kind of relax. So, but it's related to our senses, how we relate to the world, right? Our sight, our touch, the tactile sensation, smell. One of the things that I've recently come out with, that I've been working on for years and have realized the benefit, and this goes into sensory processing disorder, is actually doing what I call olfactory therapy. And that is teaching people how and why to smell. but that's a whole nother story, another video. Anyway, so as far as sensory processing disorder is concerned, what you have is hypersensitivity. You have a hypersensitivity to the world. And I think all of us, on some level, because of the neurochemical imbalances that I believe we're all living with, again, some people have it more severely than others, but the bottom line is I feel like we're all sensitive, and depending on our stress levels, we might see them go up. I know sound is one. I've talked to many people where sound will begin to bother them. We see this quite frequently in autoimmune disorders. Light, sound are big ones. I, for myself, have I have had significant issues with sound. The sound of chewing just drove me absolutely batty. Wind blowing against me just would irritate me after a while. So these are examples. I typically hear people when we talk about smell, when I talk about the olfactory system, a depleted or an impaired olfactory system is often linked to either just a lack of use, or it's an indicator of potentially Parkinson's. It's one of the early signs of Parkinson's. This is an impaired sense of smell, and or potentially a tumor in the brain. So when they've tested across when they've tested people, done massive testing research, they found that the sense of smell really didn't vary much, even though there are some people who say they don't have a very good nose. There are other people who believe their sense of smell is over the top, and then you have some people who are what we call hypersensitive to smell, otherwise also referred to as chemical sensitivity. Now, what they found is that people don't necessarily, their sense of smell isn't different. And the puzzling part for them is, so what's making it different? Well, through the research that I've been doing, I'm finding that regardless of what the hypersensitivity is to, it's an imbalance within the autonomic nervous system. And acetylcholine tends to be the one that becomes more aggravating because, and this is what I love about the body can just, it does some amazing things. It's a package all unto itself. It's fully resourceful. It's fully capable of navigating this world. The issue is that we have genetic adaptations. We have enzymatic defects where the body isn't producing the right enzymes because it's not getting the right nutrients because of these genetic adaptations. So what ends up happening is we find ourselves with diseases and disorders because of the imbalance in the chemistry that's ongoing. And long term, there's just with long term chemical misproduction, you're going to have toxins. Basically, the body's producing its own toxins, and that's what ends up being a decline in health or some sort of health issue. So on that note, we have, like I said, I believe every one of us is living with some degree of neurochemical imbalance, and I believe also many of us are sensitive to the world around us. And these two chemicals, acetylcholine and norepinephrine, are very big players in this, because when acetylcholine, and this brings me back to the magical mystery of our body and how well it just can regulate itself. I've talked about histamine in the past. Histamine is necessary. It's used by the immune system. At the same time, when it's no longer needed by the body is equipped to deactivate histamine. The same thing is true for acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is necessary for many functions within the body. I've heard some people refer to it as the king neurotransmitter. And at the same time, it must be deactivated. Otherwise, if it's not deactivated, it inhibits the norepinephrine release. And norepinephrine, so again, these two are playing off of one another, of being excitatory as well as inhibitory. And when you have too much acetylcholine at the nerve endings and it's not being deactivated, we're not getting the use of norepinephrine. And when we're not when we don't have the norepinephrine that we need, we see things like impaired memory. We see such things as, well, cognitive issues, essentially, distraction, agitation, lack of focus. These are just a couple of examples. And what do we end up with that? We end up typically with a diagnosis of ADHD or ADD. And this is the reason why I say I would tend to agree with the fact that a sensory processing disorder or a sensory processing issues are predecessors to a potential diagnosis. And if we were to actually catch this sooner in life, when we notice our children are having these issues, really learning how to deactivate, helping the body to deactivate the acetylcholine, really helping the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis to restore balance. These are the aspects of how I would come at sensory processing issues and any one of these health conditions that I listed earlier. This includes addiction. I'm very, very passionate about people in recovery. And for that matter, anybody who is struggling with an addiction and not certain what to do. On so many levels, I feel like people, like I said, are sensitive to the world, whether it be sound, light, touch, smell. It could also be just we pick up on other people. I mean, you can say what you will about what I'm saying here, but you know what I'm talking about. You can tell when we're empathic. I believe most of us, if not all of us, are already empathic, and we can sense other people. We can sense other people's emotions. We feel sad when other people are sad. I mean, think about it. When you're in a group of people who are pissed off and upset about things, what's the tendency to do? It's very difficult for someone to generate happiness and joy and be a cheerleader in the midst of upset. So this is where this is a good indicator as to how empathic you are. It's really easy to fall into a group of happy people. Everybody's having a grand time, and so are you. So these are just, again, small little examples of how we pick up on one another. And when we're not attentive to that, excuse the motorcycle. When we're not attentive to that, what ends up happening is when we've learned, we can learn how to block that. Sometimes we don't recognize why all of a sudden we were one way, then the next thing we know we feel another way. And so we kind of begin to tune out. A really good example I had of that once was with my father, who I feel like is highly sensitive to the world. He was in the Navy, he's been in battles, he saw a lot of things. And when I was growing up, I always remember him as being very stoic, very little emotion, really guarded. And unfortunately today he has Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is related to both an acetylcholine and dopamine imbalances. So I wouldn't doubt, a long time ago that there was acetylcholine, there was neurochemical imbalances that eventually led to the downfall of his health. And unfortunately, along the way, he did drink heavily, and which compounded the problem, I'm certain. So, but what I'm saying is, if he had any other sensitivity to light, sound, touch, I don't know. I do know that he wasn't a real affectionate person, so maybe there was some touch involved there, but as far as being sensitive to the people around him, I think that there was a large, and he probably had to desensitize himself, having seen what he did while being in the service. To which I appreciate everything that he did do, and everybody else that has served, before him, with him, and after him. So anyway, then we would refer to that as PTSD. I mean, we already know that when somebody goes through an issue, it's traumatic, and that level of stress rewrites the way the chemistry is functioning. And so now you have a whole nother level of sensory processing. So here you see what I'm getting at. And so how do we deactivate acetylcholine? Well, I'm not going to lie to you and say that essential oils aren't necessary. Well, they are. They're necessary because they contain the information that the human body is missing. We've studied plants and animals long enough to know that the genetic sequences there are some similarities within the animals. With the plants actually their DNA repairs itself not unlike the human body. So there's a gift in nature. And in fact, I've seen plenty of studies now that have indicated that science is using plant constituents, primarily from essential oils, but they do use other ones as well, for the research of medications. And if we already have this information as far as what plant constituents are good, then why not use them? And I'm not saying in lieu of, I'm saying in addition to. Please do not think that I am suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that people can do this without medications. If you've been living a lifetime or many years with neurochemical imbalances, to think that you are going to right the wrong immediately by just going natural, I think you're probably causing more harm than good to yourself. It would be beneficial to seek out medical advice and do some integrative work. Now, that said, essential oils are essential because they provide the information that the cells need to pick up the proper nutrients. They do not contain the nutrients. As far as oils that would work in this arena, again, that is going to be very specific to the individual because there's a whole system at work here. And so I would need to know other issues that are going on before ever making any sort of specific essential oil recommendations. On the flip side, like I said, the body is in its perfect state, is designed to actually deactivate acetylcholine, and it does this through the use of purines. Purines are something we find in things like brewer's yeast. You can find it in oatmeal. You can find it in meats, poultry, fish, dried beans. So there are sources of purines. Now, if you go out on the internet and start looking around, you're going to find a lot of people suggesting low purine diets to prevent gout and whatnot because of the excess of uric acid. Well, I want to be really responsible in saying, first of all, they're probably accurate in stating that because they're not working with the body like I am. When we're talking about assisting the body to actually do what it's supposed to do, we can begin to do things a little bit differently. Another really good source of purine, and which is it's going to be chocolate or raw cacao. And there's a good reason why I'm suggesting that one. And I'll get to that in a moment. But the whole concept of a low purine diet to prevent uric acid makes a lot of sense. But that's because the body is not using the purine properly. Purine is one of the necessary components to producing a chemical called hypoxanthine, and pairing it with ribose, which now we're talking about the breakdown of carbohydrates in order to produce, in order to support the DNA and the RNA. And it actually does also deactivate the choline, the acetylcholine. So like I said, the purine is going to come from your protein products. And if you eat primarily a plant-based diet, you're good to use raw cacao. But again, if you pair this with the essential oils, what's going to happen is you're not going to build the uric acid. If you're on medication, you want to be very specific about what essential oils that you do use in order to best support the body. So there again is another reason why a personal assessment is absolutely necessary. So the essential oil suggestions I won't make. The nutritional suggestions I will make. And like I said, I like the raw cacao because it also contains caffeine, and the caffeine is converted to xanthine in the body, and so now you have a whole nother aspect, in addition to purine, a whole nother aspect of actually supporting the deactivation of acetylcholine. Not to mention the fact it's got omega-6s in it, which are needed by the neuroendocrine system, and it also has enzymes in it, and it's just an all-around really good food, and you don't need a lot of it. So I think I've pretty much covered what I wanted to talk about. I'm really anxious to hear what you think about what might be going on for you or somebody you might know about. But again, this works for everyone. I mean, I had a mother contact me because she was concerned, we've done so much. I mean, I've been working with them for a few years, but she referred to the autism symptoms. And I'm certain what she was referring to was scripting, so we see scripting and stimming. And keep in mind that a lot of times this is done to either excite the system or to decompress the system. What I do know in this particular client's case is that she is decompressing. She's trying to, just download and just kind of relax because it's been too much, there's been too much information coming in. So she does a lot of stimming. And not that there's anything wrong with it, but that's just the way her body self-soothes. Which now we're back to the autonomic nervous system, because the autonomic nervous system is what helps us to self-soothe. And so I know it might seem counterintuitive to consider caffeine as an aspect of helping the body to self-soothe, but in small amounts. I'm not talking 5-6 cups of coffee a day. I'm talking about in small amounts, just giving your body just enough to do what it's supposed to do in a food-based source. And I don't mean food-based like added to energy drinks. I'm talking about raw cacao. I'm talking about naturally found in coffee and in tea. These sources of caffeine are exceptional when it comes to just giving the body a small amount. But like I said, in the case of autism, we see a lot of excitability or withdrawal because there's just too much information coming in, and helping to regulate that naturally through a very intentional diet and support with essential oils would be the best thing that we could do for any one of these, including Parkinson's. Because keep in mind, and again with schizophrenia, you see a lot of agitation and repetitive behavior, repetitive movements, not unlike you see in Parkinson's. So consider that if we start to regulate and help the body to regulate, not by continuing to give it neurotransmitters, but actually supporting the glands that produce and work with the entire neuroendocrine system through healthy fats and proteins and, like I said, intentional dieting, not dieting as in going on a diet, but you know what I'm saying, intentional eating with very specific foods, a very specific diet, paired with essential oils. I think you'll find really superb results. So let me know what questions you have. It's been a pleasure today. Hope you're enjoying your summer, like I said in the beginning. And I look forward to hearing from you. Bye now.